Well, hello, everyone. It's 5 minutes to 2 p.m. Central Eastern Time and 5 minutes to 3 p.m. Eastern European Time. It's great to have you all join for the session. So this is a live Q&A session with Nordigen. In this session, we'll take a deeper dive into open banking. We'll talk about the latest announcement from Nordigen's side, the free account information service. My name is Rolands Mesters. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Nordigen, and today I'm joined by my colleague, Robert Bernans,
Hi, everyone.
The Chief Product Officer and co-founder of Nordigen. So we are your hosts today. Hello, Robert. How are you doing today, sir?
Hi, Ron. I'm doing great, of course. Been very busy last couple of weeks, but I suppose we should wait for another couple of minutes before we kick it off, right? So let everyone to have a chance to join and.
Yeah, let's do that. And so while we wait, so I think we'll start the session in precisely 4 minutes. While we wait, I'm super happy to see so many people already joining in. It is the last sprint of this year, so last few days until the year closes off. So I hope everyone is having a good, productive last days. The team at Nordigen is also kind of having the last sort of a big sprint to close off the year. I see, Robert, you're kind of in this very Christmassy setting. I'm also kind of having a good Christmassy mood here at my place. How are you preparing for Christmas?
Absolutely. So Red-Nosed Reindeer is definitely helping out during the season and keeping some holiday spirit while we, as you said, doing the last sprint over the year. But it's been busy, so I'll be happy to go in details once we go in the actual QA. But you have to keep the spirit, and that's very important. So
yeah. Are you a snow person? Do you like snow?
I do, and I think it's hard to not be a snow person living in these. This up in the north, I would say.
Yeah. It definitely helps if you're a snow person. Otherwise, it's you're just constantly cold, right?
Yeah, and it's like you need these excuses to get these sweaters on, right? So having webinars and Q&As is definitely a good option for that.
Yeah. I agree. I was looking for a good reason to bring my sweater out, and here it is. We some say we did a live Q&A session only to bring out those sweaters. So I think it's probably a good time to give a bit of a schedule on what we plan to cover today. So the title of the session is questions and answers. Like some of the topics we're going to cover today involve open banking as a concept, so what it is, and we'll start from like very simple things of how it works and why would anyone need to pay attention to the idea. But then we'll also go deeper into technical aspects of open banking. We'll maybe cover some legal aspects of open banking. We'll talk about the differences between open banking and PSD2. So don't worry, we'll hold your hand all the way through. And even though open banking is pretty technical, we'll make sure that we're not going to go too much in detail into technical aspects. So we'll try to make it nice and simple, but also very informative. So I think we're probably good to start. Robert, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm happy that before we even started, we already got our first question. So let's keep them rolling. And I think that's one big suggestion for this Q&A to make happen is that I'd really encourage everyone to pitch in and really address whatever they're interested for us to cover. Because both of us, we can talk for endless hours, and I'd rather we talk about something that you might find relevant. And thanks, Norbert, for we really had to pick out from Moral sweaters collection which ones to choose today.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So without further ado, so the title of today is questions and answers about Nordigen's new account information product. But I'd love to just start with, so something happened on December 1st, something that hasn't happened to open banking, I suppose, ever in the history of open banking. Robert, what happened on December 1st? Can you give us some information?
If I'd have to explain it in one word, I would say the inevitable happened, or actually those are two words. But on the 1st of December, we launched a new product. The product is called Account Information. Essentially, what it does, it lets entities connect to bank account and get raw transaction data. And I think in principle, the product is something that have been around the market. So there's quite a few service providers across Europe and the world that do provide this service. And I think also for the reference, it's been the terminology, how it's named, has quite a few names, either account information service providers or account aggregators or screen scraping solution providers. So we have entered the market with our own product, but I think the most important thing, and probably the aspect that we're going to spend quite a lot of time today, is that we're the first ones that are providing it free of charge, and not only as a limited period or limited access or first X number of accounts or transactions to analyze, but it's unlimited, free of charge, no limitations, no hidden fees, no setup fees, no nothing. And it's definitely have made some stir in the market. So happy to go into details. And yeah, that's what 1st of December brought at our end of North Pole.
Yeah, super exciting. And maybe just to understand exactly what the solution is, can you maybe give us an example of like how these types of technologies are typically used? How does the end user flow look like, and what kind of businesses can use it typically?
So yeah, so to already add some more terminology to it. So the technology we have built is really built around the PSD2, which is a regulatory framework in Europe, which specifies that banks have to open access to licensed third parties, which Nordigen also is. And it also, there's quite a substantial amount of banks that have agreed to certain standard of how these connections should be built. And in particular, the most popular around Europe is called Berlin Group Standard, which specifies how this, let's say, API framework should be built and how this customer flow should be built. But in reality, what it is that you can let your end users to choose their bank, and then we help these end users to authenticate themselves within the specific bank. And at the end of the process, what you have 90 days access to this user's account information. And account information entails three things. So first of all, it's an account information, which is account holder name, IBAN. There's some couple mandatory fields that banks have to provide, a couple non-mandatory fields, but in reality, like these are data points around accounts. The second layer is balances. So it's everything around the account balances, the available balance, the balance after each transaction. And the third one is transactions themselves. Again, there is a bit of a variety what type of data points you can get, but essentially you get the raw transaction, like the text fields, like the dates, amounts. So the usual thing you would get from providers like us. So that's in the principle what we have built up and what we provide to our customers.
Yeah, and what are the applications, like what can be built on top of this? Can you just like name a few examples?
Sure. So actually I will look at from two parts. So one I'm gonna try to describe a couple examples what we have seen in the market, and what we see are the most common, like let's say, use cases people come to us. But the other thing is that I would like to think about this question more creatively. So in many cases, many companies were blocked by simply having a too high of a price for accessing this information. And I think what we see now is that we see a lot of new use cases we never thought of, because now once we have unlocked this price tier and taken off this absolutely have taken off this cost for acquiring data, we see a lot of new interesting applications. So And not only for companies that never work with transaction data, but even like in businesses and industries that commonly use this data source, and now they find that it's, let's say, it's like cheap enough to apply it across different use cases. But historically, this data was initially used by banks and lending institutions, obviously, because these were the institutions that was having this information in the first place as in-house data. Once it opened up, obviously, it gave a substantial support for lending, anywhere from micro lending up to consumer lending, car leasing, and so on. Then I would say the second layer was applying it for use cases which were, I would say, relatively close to lending. So we find a lot of use cases in telecommunications, insurance, a lot of KYC applications. So all across the regulated institutions, starting from betting companies, currency exchange places. So there's tons and tons of application. But again, I think I would even use the word beautiful thing about democratizing the access to data is that I think over the next couple of months, we'll see a lot of new use cases the market hasn't seen before.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I think democratizing is a big word. There's a ton. It's been used in a lot of different contexts. So what we've done here is, well, we've done something which is pretty rare. The service offered on the market is free. Can you maybe just talk us through the business model itself? Like, it sounds too good to be true. Like, free service.
Yeah.
How did we pull this off? Can you just walk us through maybe like how did we get to this? The idea, like what's the background, why the timing is now, a year later when PSD2 is live. Just give us a bit of background about that.
Absolutely. I think one of the pillars of this conversation, right? So I think it really helps to go through more like from a history lesson to get where we are today. And Nordigen is in the market for 5 years, and in its very core, Nordigen is analytics company. So what we did for a very long time, we were dependent on different account information service providers across different regions. There's actually were quite a few of our partners, depending from market to market, and we found that our big expectation was that once PSD2 comes into place, we expected that it should come, if not zero, then very close to zero. But what happened is that market pretty much kept the price that how they were pricing these type of services prior to PSD2, and obviously, like maintaining legacy systems that are built on screen scraping or reverse engineering is very costly, both to build out and to maintain. The beauty about PSD2 is that the heavy lifting is actually done on the bank's end, so it's actually much easier to build it out. And the one analogy I would like to use is I would think about different, let's say, technologies of, let's say, telecommunication, right? So if you have to switch from 4G to 5G, it's actually very, very expensive because there's a lot of legacy you have to carry. And what Nordigen did, we kind of jumped on the 5G train. So there's no legacy we have to pay for, maintain, and we are kind of free to build it however we want. And again, the beauty about PSD2, there is, like, the heavy lifting is done by banks. So I think the one thing is that market didn't converge, the price didn't converge towards zero as quickly as we expected. And if something, we actually found in some cases it was going other way around. That was one motivation to start doing that, and the other one was again, because there's a lot of legacy carried over, a lot of technology that has a lot of maintainable aspects. We found that we more oftenly dealt with support of our partners, the account aggregation companies, than we actually were doing our own business. So that was, I think, the cultivating point when we decided we have to build it on our own. And once we started building these things out, we understood that obviously there are some associated costs to build out these things. And obviously there is some maintainability to it, but I would say relatively low. And what we identified is that simply instead of kind of having a very low price to it, what we should do is give it out for free, and then have our premium services like categorization, insights, risk insights, marketing insights, have that aspect be where we actually make money. So again, our account information product is free of charge. We want people to start using it. We plan to keep it free of charge forever. So there's no, I would say, secret plans to come back in a year and like, now you have to pay for it. Really, we have built out the system that is a really low-cost system for us to build and maintain, and we can easily finance it from our premium services. And again, important thing to mention is that it's not mandatory for you to use our premium services. So this is, again, freemium model. It's free to choose for you if you want to start using our premium services or not. But yeah, I think this in a short how we have what brought us here and what was, I think, main idea of giving it out for free and how we were able to finance it.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so we were getting a good feed of questions here. So Artis and Dimitris are asking, well, some companies are known to start with a free tier and then to actually sort of ramp up the prices a year later. So is that what we're doing, or are we actually free forever?
So just to be completely clear, it's free of charge at all limits. I think what happens in the market is that some companies have, I would say, these entry levels that is free of charge, usually aimed for developers that are just trying out the solution. But really, the thresholds are so low that it doesn't really work out for companies actually running this in production. And very quickly, this data acquisition cost ramps up and is in many cases unbearable. So in our case, it's free of charge, whether you use it like once a month or a million times a month. Like, again, we have built out scalable system that can handle the traffic. And again, our intention is to never charge for account information providing. We're going to charge only if you're going to use our premium services.
Right. So because we're connecting to the free PSD2 APIs,
exactly.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
The banks do the heavy lifting. We're just making lightweight integrations and passing on the connections to the developers.
Exactly.
Perfect. So we're getting a good feed of questions, and please keep them coming in. If you ever have a question, just post it here. So Ahmed is having a fantastic question, and this is kind of nice segue into the data. Ahmed is asking, like, hey, is this only consumer data, or does it also include business data? What is the scope of these bank connections that we can connect to?
All right, very good question. So I'm going to answer this question more from the principal level of what PSD2 entails. So PSD2 applies to each and every bank. So every bank has to create their API frameworks. Obviously, in some countries and for some banks, it's taking slower. Like, for example, in Italy, it's like much more slower. For them, it's much harder to adopt the open banking. And unfortunately for them, there's quite a few fines ahead of them. So the first question, it applies to every bank. It's up how quickly and how many bank connectivities each account information service provider has made. The second question is whether it applies to consumer and or business accounts is, again, that it depends. In most countries, we find that these connections apply both for consumer accounts and business accounts. But again, there are a few exceptions where you only can get consumer accounts through this PSD2 framework. So for me to give you a more specific answer, we should look at specific countries. But in principle, it's both, but with exceptions.
Yeah. So how can you know as a developer? So you're now planning out, how can you know if the service is available?
Unfortunately, it's very hard to, there's very scarce information around the web, but my suggestion would be ask us and we'll tell you. So again, it's you will get the same answer to whichever provider you'd ask, because these connections are built by banks and it's not something we control. But we are free to comment on this if you get a specific country list, and we can help out. Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm seeing a couple of questions already kind of going into the question of coverage and countries. Mm-hmm. So I see questions from Olga and from Lena. So PSD2, it's regulation that is live in 31 countries, right? European Economic Area. Mm-hmm. It's 31 countries plus a few exotic islands, sort of linked back to European Union. and it's something like 8,000 financial institutions that need to open up their APIs. I'd love to talk about like what is from your experience in connecting to these institutions, how many of them actually have live APIs? How many can we connect to through the Nordigen connections? And so what is like the rollout plan of the service?
All right, cool. So I will address this question actually in two parts. So there's, I would say, legal aspect of it, because only institutions with AISP license can actually make the connection. So Nordigen has passported its license across this all EEA region. So we are legally allowed to work in 31 geographies. That's already settled, so we can do that. The other part is technical one. So the way there's quite a few connections we have built, and there's quite a few we still have to build out. I would say in principle, we find that as year has passed, I would find that the long tail of institutions now are kind of being added up. But I would say that larger institutions already is on board and you can access their APIs. The way we approach it, so we have built out quite a few connections, and we roll out countries by country or by region. So there's a certain process we want to go through to validate that all APIs work fine, they work fine at scale, the connectivities are stable. So there's, I would say, quite a substantial amount of test users we have. And then once we feel confident, we roll it out this country to public use. But to speak, and I would say in broader terms, our ambition is to be available in all 31 countries and to cover all these 8,000 institutions. So I would say that most of the countries will be live in next coming months. So we're that ambitious. And it's hard to predict once we're gonna do all the 8,000 institutions, but idea is also that once we go live in country, our coverage exceeds 90% of specific, like the banks in specific country. So by default, you would get the largest institutions and a couple of smaller ones.
But how does, I mean, it works like probably some of the largest banks also have, in every single country they have good coverage, right? So it literally would mean that you need to integrate with a few banks in every single country to get to that 60, 70, 80%, right?
Yeah, it depends. There are obviously a few exceptions where you can do with 2 banks. Obviously, in smaller countries like Latvia or the Baltics, it normally suffices with 4 to 5 banks to cover up to 90%. And then you have larger markets where you, like UK and Germany, where it's like 10 plus. So it really depends from the market to market. But again, the way I would look is that from day 0, we're not going to cover each and every bank. We want to roll it out and make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And then the idea is to improve the coverage based on demand we get from our clients. Because for however long we have worked, we always follow the logic of follow whatever your clients want, right? So depending where the biggest density and demand for clients is going to be, we're going to obviously work harder on the coverage there. But again, I think the important here is that obviously it all sounds good on paper, but I think the important here is that we have spent tons of time on figuring how to build a scalable architecture. So I think even if you think about these 8,000 connections, then it's fair to say we're not thinking about years to do it. It's probably closer to a year or 2. So.
Yeah, so Rahul actually has a question about this. The question is, how long does it typically take for you to integrate your offering with the bank? So like how fast can we integrate with the bank?
It's a good question, but again, I will answer how quickly it is for us, but I'm pretty confident that it's not unanimous in all the industry. So normally I would call it like a project time from the time when we start integration, by the time it's live and working, normally it takes around 2 weeks. But again, it doesn't mean that we work for 2 consecutive weeks, but there's a lot of nitty-gritty details we have to work on. And again, I would say that it's relatively easy for any development team to build out 2, 3, 5, 10 connections. But once you have to scale it up, that's a tough thing to do, because like there's different authentication flows, different logics, how information is handled. So it's quite a challenging task.
Yeah, you mentioned that to operate to connect to those PSD2 APIs, you need a certain license. Like, can you just like walk me through, what that license is? What does it allow you to do? What it doesn't allow you to do? When do you need it? Why you don't need it?
All right. So let's open our legal books, right? So under PSD2, there's two licenses companies can acquire. One is called AISP, which is Account Information Service Provider. One is PISP, which means Payment Initiation Service Provider. So for the full clarity, we offer only the first one. So we don't do payments at all. We only work in account information acquisition part. So what it does, this license permits you to connect to bank APIs and in behalf of other entities connect to end user's account and then facilitate access to this account information. It's actually a quite painful process to acquire one, because normally it is issued by the local banking authorities. So we have gone through the very same process that I would say any financial institution has to go through when they apply for a license. So it's actually quite a lengthy and expensive process to do. And it also implies a lot of checks we have to do. So there's obviously there's tons of checks on our business plan, on our business continuity. There's a lot of checks on information handling, and like beyond simply GDPR. There's also a lot of things on KYC and AML we have to follow. But the way I look at it is, these are things we have to handle. This is not things our clients have to even know or see. This is something we have already done, let's say, behind the curtain. So all is set. We are legally have obtained this license. We are license holders, so and we can do it all across EEA. So.
Yeah, and Will just wanted to clarify, so are we expecting that all our users of the free service would have their own AISP licenses, or are we offering an agency model as part of the free service?
All right, so when it comes to AISP, most of the use cases can be covered by our license. There are some specific exemptions or cases when our client would have to acquire a license themselves. I think more aggressive on this front is FCA in UK, which, let's say, specify that you need a license on your own if you're going to show this transaction data also to the end user. Again, it's not the same approach all across Europe. There's quite a few regions where we haven't actually encountered a single use case where you need an AISP license on your own. That's from the legal point of view. There are also service providers in the market that I'll use terminology lease their license, which in principle means you take like sub-licensees that would have to kind of comply to all the things we are complying, essentially meaning that you also are having an AISP license. What we found out is that we don't intend to provide that service, because putting someone as a sub-licensee is actually as painful as acquiring a license on your own. So in principle, we don't actually help anyone out. There are some few regulatory geographies where that is easier to do. Like this software is very common in UK and Germany. But again, I doubt it's you're going to save significantly more time than trying to apply for a license on your own.
So what you're saying is that, like, for a big amount of use cases, they don't, customers don't need their own AISP license. Yeah. They could just piggyback on our license, and then in some cases you might still need a license. But you're also saying you're no lawyer. You don't know specifically which those are. It's probably best to consult your local regulator, right?
Absolutely. So there, we always say that, like, if in doubt, go to your local regulator. We found that these institutions are very open to give consultation on this matter, and also have like a legal, what's called like a paper to justify your application and whether or not you actually need a license or not. But again, as you pointed out correctly, in most use cases you don't need one. So we can kind of direct you in some cases.
Yeah, perfect. We're getting a good feed of questions. Simon and Martins are asking, so what about the neobanks, Monzo, Starling, Tide? What about the likes of TransferWise and Revolut? Are those also included under the PSD2? Can we connect to them as well?
Yes, that's the short answer, is that PSD2 also applies for these institutions because they're either bank license holders or e-money license holders, and both of them apply to this ruling as well, and they're obliged to create their own API frameworks. So like you have all there, Revolut and number 26, Monzo, Atom Bank, Starling, all these new neobanks or digital first or digital only banks are part of the solution.
Perfect. Andy is following up with a question, and since we're talking about regulation, we just might as well just go right in. So, like the reason we can connect to those banks and offer these connections for free is because there's an open banking framework in Europe, right? The PSD2 and the Open Banking Initiative in UK. Australia just launched its own Consumer Data Act, and Andy is asking, well, are we looking to register in Australia anytime soon? Robert, can you reveal any plans, or what's your rollout?
Andy, we will be in Australia. You just have to wait. But in short, our ambition is that this type of free access to data should not be only applicable or available to people in Europe, but worldwide. Obviously, with some again limitations, but Australia is a very good example. I think Australian authorities have followed very much like FCA from UK. So what we see is that the regulation and the framework is very similar to what we see in Europe. And obviously, and also we're operating in Australia as of now with our premium services. So I cannot give any specific date, but we are definitely going to go there. And it's not only Australia. We see these trends in South and Central America. There's all these open banking is taking place all across the world. I mean, just have to wait for the right time to enter the market when it's regulated, when it's standardized, and we can offer it for free.
Yeah, interesting. So like it took us a year after PSD2 was live to do this in Europe. So since the Consumer Data Act in Australia is live, I think since this year, then it shouldn't be long until we're there, according to Robert. So interesting. Let's talk about the user side. Like that's like, so open banking is only as usable as the people make it, right? If you're a consumer and you're asked to connect your bank accounts, well, open banking can give value to the business only if the user does connect to the bank account, right? And so I think before PSD2, users were well, there was no way to connect to those banks aside from asking the users bank credentials. And then now with PSD2, it's different, right? So how is it different? And just can you talk about the user facing side of the experience, I guess, and how is it different now that PSD2 is live and free?
Yeah, absolutely. So Roland, you have opened the Pandora box, but
I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're completely right. So one, I would say, taboo metric in this whole market that very rarely somebody discusses is dropout rates. When you actually present someone with a, let's call it like a user interface, when they have to engage and select like a bank and then do authentication. So there's a couple of things. So first of all, we identified that there's a huge drop-offs when people are exposed to these, I'll call like a widgets. Widgets is like a terminology used in the market, which is a kind of a user interfaceable part where people select their bank. And usually these widgets are predefined based on the visual identity of account information service provider. And each have their own visual identity and way they have built this widget up. And we found out that that's actually a huge factor for a dropout rate. So what we thought is that we need to give option to our clients to own this visual identity of this step. So instead of creating widgets, we actually create simple API framework where you can query and find available banks in this particular region. And you can create this this user interface on the fly that would totally fit in your whole user flow and your whole visual flow. So whenever an end user is exposed to like this, starting off this process of selecting your bank, they actually don't feel threatened that it's like some weird imagery and something that they haven't seen before. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the one big problem with older generation technologies, which unfortunately is also transferred in many cases to even PSD2 framework, is that companies, like as account information service providers, are using their identity and their fields when they ask for user details, like your user ID or authentication details. What we knew is that we have to totally eliminate this step. So instead, we only rely on bank's authentication flow. So user would instantly get redirected from your visual identity to bank's visual identity. So these would be two environments where end user would feel safe, and we would avoid these dropout issues. And I think the third point to add is that there's one very crucial thing that PSD2 unlocks, is that for 90-day period, you can access user's account detail without requiring the user to re-authenticate themselves, which was something that you couldn't do with older technologies like screen scraping or reverse engineered APIs, is that you had to kind of ask the user every single time, please authenticate yourself, authenticate yourself. Now it significantly improves the user experience in terms of that they don't have to kind of go through this process. So it helps both companies that needs this continuous access to data, and it also applies to companies that, let's say, have like in lending business where you have like first interaction when a person takes out a loan, and then you can monitor the person, like how they're doing, and if necessary, you can also query this information, let's say if you do a debt collection. So again, you open a lot of possibilities just because you have this continuous access to this data for 90-day period of time.
Yeah, so I mean, PSD2 gives a lot of technical capabilities, and you can you can have a flow that's secured. You don't have to, you're not storing any credentials, so you're just connecting users to the bank, and they can just they're redirected to the bank, and then they're making interactions with the bank, not on the API side. But like clearly you still have to inform the users of what it is that they're doing, right? So how do you build an application that allows to have a high conversion rate? If you're building a FinTech application and you want 100% success rate, 100% of people that that are about to sign up, how do you get that?
Again, it's there's a couple, I would say, good practices you have to follow. So this is something that I would say, a competency we're building out internally, is how we can advise our customers to shoot for this 100%. And I would be happy if we get there one day, but it's definitely a noble target to go for. So again, I would say there's a couple of things that need to come into place. So it's definitely this visual identity. It's trusting the service provider. It's definitely having very clear information for the end user. So what they're going to engage with, what we're going to do with this data. So people are becoming much more, I would say, conscious on the GDPR and the aspects and owning the data. So you have to be crystal clear about that. So I would say it's very much a combination of visual elements, of informative elements, so not to scare this person off. And again, you need to inform people on the rights, right? So even down to small things like how you can delete your data, or how you can cancel the access to data. So there's a lot of details we have to cover and we have to manage and maintain. But again, safety is, I think, very primary aspect of making sure that your conversions are high.
Yeah, right. I mean, like the good thing is that PSD2 is live at a time where GDPR is live, right? So you have something that regulates the consumer, it protects the consumer really, and as long as you're following GDPR, you're also following to a large extent the PSD2, right? But those are two separate kind of connections. I mean, there is you need consent in GDPR, but you also need consent in PSD2. How does that consent gathering side work? Can you just give us, walk us through of what are the different steps and what as a business you need to think about, and what is what is the responsibility of Nordigen in this case?
So again, our key idea here when we developed this, I would say, part of the user journey, what our idea was to keep it as simple as possible. So we actually allow our users to do it two ways. So you can use our default option is when this consent is actually handled by us. So we as a licensed party would inform the end user that now you're gonna enter the bank's user flow, you're gonna give access to your account, and for the X days, this company will be able to access your information. But we have also built a functionality that this whole consent flow can be managed by our customers. I think I'm pretty confident to say that we're the first ones to do it. So what it actually entails is that by using our API, our clients can build this consent screen themselves. So essentially, they would get assigned a unique ID to specific terms and conditions and privacy policy. It would also specify these specific variables, such as like number of days for the, let's say, the history you're going to retrieve, and so on. And then you'll be able to present the screen on your own to the consumer. Obviously, it's a bit more complicated from our end to make sure everything is legal and compliant. But for our trusted partners, we can open this API so they can handle it on our own. And again, what it implies that there's more control for you as a client to control the user flow. And you can avoid, again, these dropout rates with having unnecessary visual elements, screens, and you have full control of what works and what doesn't for you as a client. Because again, like Europe is a large market. There's different countries, different cultures, different colors have different, let's say, associations with different people. So again, the more we create a framework and the more we give control to our clients, the more our clients can control that the service is used in optimal way and as intended.
Yeah. You talked about, you know, how Europe is this fragmented place, right? So, I mean, like PSD2 covers 31 countries. It's crazy. And now let's talk a bit about data. So, like what's the reason why anyone would want to use open banking is to get access to the data. You talked about those data points that you can get from open banking, right? So you talked about the PSD2 APIs can give you the person name, the account number, the transaction history, as well as connectivity to 90 days to transactions as kind of people are using their bank accounts. But like, PSD2 also sounds like a great framework. I mean, like, it sounds like we can, just connect to the API and get raw data, and it's going to be, same data format all across the board. Is that true? Is that, or are we talking about like, 8,000 institutions going to have 8,000 data formats?
Good question. So again, I will first off tell how we approach it, and then I'll explain the thinking behind it. So what we do is we return raw transaction data, or the exact feed we get from the banks. So there's a couple of things here. So the one thing is that most of the banks follow one standard. So as aforementioned Berlin Group standard, which specifies how this, let's call it like API output should look like. So there is certain standardization, there is mandatory fields, non-mandatory fields, there's good description on what each field means and how you should apply each field. What we didn't do, and I think that is what we did as opposed to what other companies did in the market, we didn't create any standardization on top. So we don't have any standardized output, because what we found is that there's the raw data is so rich, is that whatever standardization we're going to add on top, we're going to lose some data. So I think that is a very important thing, is that whatever PSD2 entails, you get it. So there's no limiting factors. And I think why it's important is that what we find for some account information service providers is that once they have added this standardization layer, they miss out on some data points that's available. Like one example is that, let's have an example. So you can have an IBAN number from the raw output. And again, if you add the standardization layer, you have to kind of return this IBAN number in all cases, which is, funnily enough, not always the case. So the more raw data we give, the more control, again, our clients have to get whatever data they have. And again, if our clients would struggle to use this data, and I don't think in principle they should, that's why we have these premium services that where you can shove this raw data in our engine. It will figure out what to do it, whether it's a categorization, some various scoring mechanisms we're going to do, or insights products. But again, the main idea here, we give out standardized or like this Berlin Group standard output that gets you the most rich data you can get out of it. And we stay away from standardizing on its own because we know we're going to lose some information. So because again, there's going to be new use cases. People will find necessity for different data. Some need pending transactions, some don't. Some need IBAN, some don't. So we want to keep as many options as possible to our clients to have.
Yeah, perfect. Gaudenis is asking a question about the scope of the data you can pull from the connections. Like, what is the longest time period? How much data can you pull out from a bank account?
I would say it depends on the bank, but it's anywhere from 30 days to the full history that is available. So unfortunately, PSD2 doesn't, or Berlin Group standard doesn't really specify this history that you can get. But normally, again, I would say these 30 days and this full history is more like exceptions to rule. What we find is that in most cases, you can get like up to 2 years of data, and as a default option, we have 90 days, which is, I think, the most common application in the market, and for vast majority of the banks, we can support that.
So basically, the free service gives you whatever is available, like whatever is the best thing
Yeah, there's two things. So I think this is where the GDPR comes in. So there's this principle of data minimization, which implies that you should take only that amount of data that you actually require to do whatever you intend to do, right? So this is actually something that we let our clients to control, but in principle, the GDPR would then specify that if you don't need the full history of data, then don't. And what Nordigen helps you to do is we can help you to technically, let's say, set up the period you want to gather, and that's going to be specifically applied from client to client. So for whatever use case you want to have. So let's say there's some use cases where you need only like last day, because let's say you're doing the IBAN checks, or you're checking the available funds in the account, or you're checking only the pending transactions. And there's some use cases where you need like couple months transactions, or down to a couple of years. Let's say if you're working in mortgages, like 3 months might not be sufficient, so you want to go a bit further than that, like 6 to 12 months. So in principle, you can select that in our solution, and it would return the, let's say, the asked amount.
Perfect. So you've quite extensively covered what data can you get from PSD2 and what data can you get through Nordigen, and you also talked about like the service is free because you banks do all of the heavy lifting, and we're just connecting to those free APIs, and so it sounds like a great opportunity for any developer to start building. But then how does it plug into the premium services in Nordigen? Is that, you mentioned you don't, if you're a developer and all you want to do is build a great application, and you can do the data handling on your own, there's no limitations. You don't have to use the premium services. But like, let's say if you do want some help on data enrichment, so, what can you get from the premium services? How easy it is to connect? Can you just walk us through how do those things link together?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, there's a couple of things here. So we have always built our solutions based from the developer's perspective, because someone has to make these integrations, right? Keep them as simple as possible. And what we have done, we have actually 2 separate environments. So our new product is like a separate product that lives its own life, and that's why you never get these nags on, hey, start using this or that. And to use our premium services, you have to, we have a separate, let's call it like a dashboard, where you can access these services that has like its own like invoicing mechanism, so all those sorts of things. While for the free of charge services, you have none of that clutter. It's like pure APIs, access token, user management, and pardon my French, no additional BS, right? So it's like simple, clean. It's the free of charge service, and it's built only for that purpose. So now, if you find that you have some struggles, if you struggle to kind of use this data, apply this data, this is where premium end comes into place, and we're happy to consult and help our clients in any means possible. And I think there's two general options. So we have standardized product suite that is built from the best practices in the market, and I think the most two common use cases are built around, or I would say three are around risk use cases, marketing use cases, and the KYC. So what you can do is the raw output you get from the account information product, you can plug again an API and get a response on whatever products you're interested in. The other thing is that we find that not always the standard suits fits to everyone. So we also specialize in custom models. We do build custom categorization models with custom taxonomies that are built to optimize on specific things. Like, let's say some clients need 100% accuracy on salary, we can do it. Some clients need specific expense categories to be in more detail than our, let's say, standardized categorization tree offers. That's why we have this custom tree consulting option. And the same way we can build custom predictive models, again, built specifically for specific use cases, built specifically on your data. So I would say we can help companies quite extensively on the insight analytics part. But what we ask for the clients is get to know this free service on their own, learn and try to figure out what use case they want to solve, and then we can come in and help you out.
Super exciting. So I think we're kind of rapidly approaching the end of the session, and we've had so many fantastic questions, and I think I've gone also through some of the most frequent questions that we received in the last 2 weeks. It's been crazy hell of a ride. I'd love to talk about the future. Right now we're approaching the end of the year. It's been a wild year, to say the least, I think, for everyone. And it finally seems to be kind of over. And everyone's super, looking very hopefully to the next year. And I mean, looking at open banking is no different, right? So, open banking is in its sort of early days. And we're kind of eager to see new use cases come out. We talked about credit assessment as a use case, very big in Europe, right? We talked about personal finance management. It's been there since the late 90s. So personal finance apps have been there before open banking was cool. What are some of those use cases that you think would be the future use cases? And I'm talking about what do you think is going to be the winning use case for Europe? What is going to be that that moment when everyone goes wow, that was big. So, your personal take. What's your best guess?
Rolands, now you're asking me $1 billion question. So if I would get my guess right,
let's make this valuable for everyone.
Get rich. But I would again, I will sneakily avoid this question and say that historically, when you look at times when companies get access to this data, and even if I look at some of our, let's call them former partners, and competitors as of now, even companies like Plaid unlocked many use cases they never thought of. And the growth for Plaid actually came from different companies. So I would say that, sure, I would definitely expect that I would say the use cases we have seen around for a while, like lending and PFMs, should definitely get some boost, just because you can actually play around more with your, I would say, core service and not be bothered about spending tons of money on auxiliary services like account information. But again, I think I want to keep my creative thinking open and see what comes around. And I think you should ask me this question in 3 or 6 months, and I hope I'm going to be able to give you, I would say, much more straightforward answer with many more interesting use cases we have seen coming out of with help of Nordigen.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think so now that anyone can get access to the API, there's no limitations really. You can no longer, you don't have to be a sort of a rich large institution to access those APIs. Now you can, literally any developer can sort of connect and start building. The future is unwritten, is it not?
Absolutely. So I think that's the beauty about like unlocking these things. There's opportunities nobody knows about. So
yeah,
I hope like at least someone from people listening to us and watching us will get an inspiration to think outside the box, and we'll try to figure out something nobody thought of. And again, I would be happy the facilitator to that, be part of somebody else's success.
So how does anyone can get access to the API? Like what do you do? So and if you have like a friend who's kind of like thinking about it, how do you get your friend on board?
Again, the idea is to keep it simple, right? So we don't want to put any artificial barriers. I think the only thing is that, truth to be told, a couple of things happened when we made the announcement. So first of all, our inbound traffic has overwhelmed us, which is a good problem. The second thing is that we find that there are some companies that I would say doesn't have the like best intentions. So again, if we offer something free of charge, so we have a couple, I would say, interested parties looking to simply resell our product and monetize on it, which would totally be the purpose of giving it out for free. So how the process goes. So we have our own portal, which you can freely access. It's linked in our webpage. Once you're going to go in, you'll be asked to fill in a short questionnaire. This is like, I would say, a verification mechanism you have to go through. And I would say with very few exceptions, most people pass. And once we're ready to onboard you, then the process happens. And I think this is probably the slowest process now, because again, we didn't encounter there's going to be such a demand for this service. So we're ramping up our onboarding team to be capable of getting more and more people on timely manner. But really the process is simple. You need to apply, fill out a short form. Doesn't take more than a minute or two. It's really quick. If all checks out, you get an access to system and we don't bother you. It's a self-service system. You get everything in the platform. You have your production tokens, you have your sandbox environment, you have your production environment. You can manage the users on your own. And again, it's not built with complicated mechanisms like invoicing, because you don't need to invoice anything in this case, right?
That's so great. That's really, really, I'm super excited what people are going to build. Like personally, I think it's what Europe really needed to get BSD2 off the ground. Well, Robert, thank you so much for doing the session. You're very, very busy, and it's been a crazy time, and I'm so glad that we did the session. So many great questions. Like we got a ton of great questions in the last 2 weeks, but also the session has proved that, well, like there's tons of questions to answer, and my learning from this is that there just needs to be more documentation publicly available, and we'll make sure that it's there. Thanks everyone for joining in for the session. I think it concludes it today. As always, we're as you can see, we're quite approachable. We've now put faces to some of the emails you've been getting, and so if you have any questions,
I hope there is a single person having this kind of T-shirt listening to us. I really hope so. So
yeah, we're like,
spirit.
Exactly. Like if something screams approachable, I mean, like these ugly sweaters definitely do. But thanks a lot for joining, everyone. I wish you a lovely end of the year. It's been a crazy year. We've all survived it, and it's been amazing. And as always, if you have any questions, suggestions, ideas, please reach out to us, and I'm more than happy to start engaging. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day, and let's be in touch.
Bye.